from 6.
The excellent Five Live Breakfast. So here's my chat with Stephen Fry. I spoke to him recently about his new TV programme called Out There. He's travelled across the world to find out what it means to be gay, what that experience is like in different parts of the planet. Just a warning, some of the detail we talk about is quite graphic and difficult to listen to. Stephen Fry, good afternoon.
Hello, Richard.
Nice to see you. Congratulations on the documentary. It's a thrilling piece of work. I know at points it's very moving, but it's full of absurdities as well, isn't it?
It truly is. It's a very odd thing to go around the world looking for homophobia, or at least the original idea was to see the state of play in the world, as it were, for the life of what you might call the average gay man or woman in different continents. But it soon became clear that there's such a huge gap between where we are, say in Britain, we're speaking now at a time where the Queen has put into law the Equal Same-Sex Marriage Act, which was unthinkable even 10 years ago in this country.
There's still opposition to that, though, isn't there?
There is opposition, but I think it will disappear in the same way that opposition to equal pay for women existed in my childhood. I mean, I remember it under the Heath government, and people thought, but equal pay for women? A ridiculous idea. But I don't think anybody thinks that's ridiculous now. And yet it was voted against. You can go and look back in Hansard and see who voted against it. It's quite extraordinary, and many did.
Well, also, was it 1967 when homosexuality was made legal?
Yes,
was decriminalised.
Yeah.
And I think there are about, I read a piece by Matthew Paris about this, I think there are about 10 surviving politicians, so there may well be in the Lords now, who voted against that.
Yes.
Margaret Thatcher voted for it.
She did. I mean, it's the one thing to be said to the praise of any libertarian, which is what she was essentially, whether a right-wing or a left-wing libertarian, is that they're not interested in what people do in the privacy of their homes. They're only interested in freeing up markets and freeing things up, which is what the bit of libertarian is, I suppose.
Although in the latter part of her reign.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's that word that comes up when you go to Uganda as well about promoting homosexuality. That was written into British law, wasn't it?
Just bizarre, yes. It was Section 28, it was called. And it was actually incredibly useful for the gay movement, if one wants to call it that, in Britain, because it united a huge number of people against it. It was a law that said it was illegal for anyone in a state-funded school to promote homosexuality as a normal equivalent type of lifestyle. A simply unenforceable law, and I don't think anybody was ever so much as fined or sacked for breaking it. But what it did was it just brought everybody together in sort of hooting, derisory contempt against it, because it was so stupid, it was so foolish. And a lot of conservatives that I knew at the time were deeply embarrassed by it.
Were they?
And I remember there was a wonderful man called Tristan Garrell-Jones, who was the chief whip, who used to invite me occasionally to these rather grand parties at which political things were discussed. And the wife of a very senior cabinet minister said to me, yes, but you see, this was around the time that later Edwina Currie, bless her socks, had introduced a private member's bill to equalise the age of consent. And the wife of this cabinet minister, whose opinion was no more valid than anybody else's, or no less valid, but I hated to think that she was trying to persuade her husband how to vote, which is not her job.
But that must happen a lot.
She said, but it's a sort of charter for predators to hang around football pitches. And I said, well, is the age of consent as it stands for men and girls a charter for men to hang around netball courts? It's just saying equality. It's not. Why do you get this? Where do you get these ideas from?
But also that word promoting. And what's interesting is that it comes up in the documentary is you don't talk about any other subject in school. You don't say we're going to promote history today.
No, it's so strange.
They put a pejorative word in there, haven't they?
Yeah.
Deliberately, I think.
I think that's right. And I came across these arguments thousands and thousands of miles apart, whether it was in India or in Brazil or in Russia or in the United States. The sort of the twin, or in fact triple, fallacies on which homophobia was based. I mean, because I can see it as an irrational hatred or fear of gay people, which if people want to fess up and say that's what they feel, then you can deal with it in that sense. But it's when they try and rationalise it and say whether they're a Ugandan pastor or a Brazilian senator, and they're saying it is because gay people choose their lifestyle, which is they choose to be gay, which is obvious nonsense, especially nonsense in a country which is rapidly homophobic. Can you imagine choosing to be gay in Iran or Iraq, where I saw pictures that I'm not even going to begin to try and explain to your listenership. They're too distressing, but they are of death penalties being carried out on young men in Iraq, and I've never seen images so upsetting. Now, why would anybody choose to be gay in a country where that happens to you? I mean, it just makes no sense whatsoever. And also, the argument to say back is, OK, if you think that, I challenge you to choose to be gay for a week. It's apparently a possible choice, and I'll choose to be straight for a week. And we'll see how we get on, all right? Yeah. And you can go to these bars and try and pick someone up. I'll go to a singles bar and try and get off with a lady and see how well that choice works, shall we? Yeah. And they go, no, I refuse to choose to be gay. Well, no, because you can't. So that's that one thing, is the idea that it's a choice. Which it was. And it follows to them, therefore, that if it's a choice, you can somehow propagandize the young into it.
The word recruit comes up, doesn't it?
And I said, well, I spent my entire life as a child being recruited into heterosexuality. Every car advert had a bunny girl on it. Every Carry-On film had a kind of Barbara Windsor. All my friends were saying, have you seen the picture? Have you seen the bazonkas on that? As they flick through a magazine. Everything, every film was a love story between men and women. Everything that surrounded me was recruiting me into the normal lifestyle of heterosexuality. And it didn't work. Not because I was positively willing it not to work. I for a time, until I grew in confidence, when I was thinking there was something desperately wrong with me, because I knew that wasn't working. This vast recruitment, 99% of everything, if not 100%, was there telling me that this was what my life was going to be.
Has there been a...
So if that didn't make me straight, how can just simply saying there are gay people, get over it, how can that make someone gay? I mean, is heterosexuality so fragile a thing that it can be tipped over just by me saying, oh, I quite like being gay, yes, and I'm quite happy with it.
Of course, you're surrounded by that. Is there a single great work of fiction or a romantic story about two gay people? I don't think there is
no, not since the death of E.M. Forster, when he allowed his novel Morris to be published. He didn't allow it to be published in his lifetime. There was the first great lesbian novel, Well of Loneliness, by Radcliffe Hall, and there were, codedly gay novels, The City and the Pillar, Gore Vidal's second novel, and otherwise it was porn. Which is terrible, because of course that makes you growing up gay, at least if you're my generation, thinking that the whole thing was a rather seedy business, that it wasn't about love. And of course it is about love.
Well, actually, I think the greatest romantic film of all time, Brief Encounter, is a film written by a gay man.
Of course it is. You can just tell, can't you? It is a chance encounter on a train. It's a pickup. It's a pickup by it's an illicit affair. And a lot of the best stories like that were written by gay men, in which they coded them. Terence Rattigan is a very good example in his plays, and Noel Coward naturally as well.
In making this show, I mean, it's... I'll just come back to what I was saying at the beginning, is that I think it's bold in some ways. I think it's moving. There are several points where you cry in the show. Yes. And there are points where it's absolutely absurd.
It's so funny. I know. I mean, the Pastor Mali, the Ugandan minister, who is so completely obsessed with the physical act of... I will anagrammatize in order to save your listeners embarrassment, of Alan sex, that he just can't stop talking about it, and it's just sort of eye-watering detail that he goes into. And I was trying to explain to him that if you do object to that alternative sexual methodology, then you will find there being 80% at least, or 85% of the population, 90%, who knows, are being straight, and of that 90%, quite a lot of the males are interested in that alternative sexual. So if you were to look up Alan sex on Google, say, or another search engine of your choice, others are available, you will find the first 6 million return pages are heterosexual. So if your objection is to sodomy, then turn to heterosexual use of sodomy, because it's far greater in numbers. If there's any act of sodomy going on now as we speak, it will be outnumbered 100 to 1 by men and women than men and men.
That comes back to the old basic argument, doesn't it? That it is wrong because you can't create a baby because you can't procreate.
That was the whole purpose, and it says so in the Book of Common Prayer, in the wedding ceremony, and so on. The whole purpose of marriage, and of course, in societies in which the ownership of land and the production of children was your only surefire way of having any form of prosperity, and this is true also in the Third World in many places, and awful stories, as we know, in India, where having girl children is regarded as some sort of curse, because you need men, you need boys because they earn more money, and so on. And so in the Middle Ages and earlier in our society, it was, of course, very crucial for couples to get together and have children in order to work the land and to look after them when they were old.
And you're saying hence why these things were written down.
But and one can absolutely see that. But there are so many things that heterosexuals do that are not natural.
That are not going to produce a baby.
Exactly.
The range of things that heterosexuals do.
And we're certainly not banning infertile couples from marrying.
No, or people in their 70s from marrying.
Or people in their 70s from marrying, exactly. No. And I spoke to zoologist friends, having done some wildlife documentaries and being a spokesman for Fauna and Flora International, and I got sort of averaged out that there had been specifically, it's very hard to be exact, but homosexual behaviour exhibited by mammals alone in between 400 and 600 species.
Between 400
as well as the famous gay penguins and various other species. Very
so when people say it's not natural, if natural means of nature, then it occurs in nature.
There's only one species which has ever been shown to exhibit homophobia, and that is mankind.
When you encounter really aggressive homophobia, which you do in this show, so you go around the world really exploring homophobia, I think is really what the show is about, isn't it?
Yes.
And what is that about? With a really absolutely violently aggressive opposition to it, where does that come from, do you think?
It's very odd. I mean, this might be regarded as a cheap shot, but it has been shown in research, particularly in America. They've done several in an East Coast university, I can't remember, somewhere in Virginia, I think they did a particularly big study where they have a natural cohort, which is a large number of students, and so they paid a large number of male students a small amount of money. They said, if you're gay, you're excluded from this. We only want straights. They were then asked to fill in forms about their views of homosexuality, according to absolute total acceptance, mild disapproval, and furious loathing and disgust. And they then attached electrodes or whatever things to their nether regions and started to show them pornography. And they showed them heterosexual pornography, and these straight boys reacted as you would expect lusty students to react. They showed them girl-on-girl pornography, and similarly, as straight lusty young men, they reacted as you would expect them to react. They then showed them gay pornography. And the ones who had expressed complete acceptance and not interested and they can do what they like about gays did not react at all. But the ones who had been most violently homophobic had twitchings in their loins. And I think you'll find it's the brute thug who delivers the last vicious kick to the kidneys of the victim of queer bashing, who is the one who is somehow least at peace with themselves sexually. Why on earth would anybody bother to single out someone who looks gay and say, let's get him? What threat do they pose you? I mean, if it was someone who was bigger than you and was trying to rape you, then you could understand. You'd fight back and you'd get your friends to fight back, and maybe that would get out of control. But the usual case is no. It's someone who looks faintly effeminate, possibly. It might even be a metrosexual straight person who happens to be just choosing the wrong path across a park, or even, for heaven's sake, across Trafalgar Square, as happened a couple of years ago. And they get their head bashed in, 40 times, cracks to the skull, killed outright, kidneys split, You know, there's such fury and venom, and you can't express why anybody would feel fury unless there was something inside them that they hadn't come to terms with.
Or is it something perhaps within inside them that they are angry about?
Exactly.
They
have to show their friends just how anti-gay they are. I was the one who really killed him. Yeah. That proves how straight I am. You know, and that's a terrifying thought, which is why education is all the more important, so that people don't feel the need to feel threatened by gay people, because phobia is fear. It's as much as hatred. Phobos was the Greek god of fear, and
these are the sorts of details I always expect in a conversation with Stephen Fry.
Well, like arachnophobia, you're afraid of spiders.
Yeah,
and it's. I think that's a lot of that really, really strong homophobia. Is why would you bother? You know, I mean, there are certain things I don't particularly like. It could be anything from coriander to Strictly Come Dancing, but I don't try and stone Bruce Forsyth to death, or I just don't watch it.
No.
You know, and I don't think less of anybody who does. I'm not snobbish about it. It's just not my kind of thing. It's dancing really, and coriander disgusts me. So if I'm in a restaurant, I say, "Can you please make sure there's no coriander in it?" But I don't go and set fire to coriander farms. You know, it's just you cope with things you dislike. Now, obviously, there are things you thoroughly disapprove of politically. Racism and use of chemical warfare, what it is, and you then get in a terrible liberal bind about how you respond to it. You don't want, because the problem with tolerance is you tolerate things, and most things that upset you are examples of intolerance. And how do you cope with that? By not tolerating intolerance. How am I not going to tolerate it? Do I think we should go to war against Syria? Of course I don't think that. War? A, practically, what good has ever come out of war in the Middle East? B, is that going to stop Assad? Is it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just the whole thing's so difficult. So you just find yourself a squeezed liberal, wringing your hands, which both other sides have nothing but contempt for. The left think is pathetic, and the right think is pathetic.
Yes.
And you know it is pathetic, but it's because you're trying to do the right thing.
It's particularly in America that would be considered pathetic, wouldn't
really
it? Where you have to have a black and white view, and you're like, but I can sort of see a bit of both, and I don't quite know what to do.
I'm like that on everything, from the badger cull to, if I speak to someone who's stridently anti-badger cull, I kind of think, well, I do know some farmers who really, really do think it's worth trialling. And then I speak to farmers who talk about culling the badgers, and I think, hang on. Even if it works, it's going to be such a low percentage that cattle that are saved, it's surely not worth giving Mr. Brock such a hard time. And then I think, oh, shut up, Stephen. Don't even see. Some of your readers are going to be tweeting me saying, how can you not have a clear view on this? It's clearly right or clearly wrong.
No, but this makes you perfect for the BBC.
Well, that's true, actually. But I always used to think when I was young that the BBC spokesman would always come out and say, well, we've had a large number of complaints saying that we seem to be favouring the left on that issue, and a large number of complaints showing that we're favouring the right, which I think shows we've got the balance about right. Well, yes, you made everybody hate you.
I sometimes think that it's, as with views towards racism, to me that's a similar mystifying thing.
Yes.
I think, shut up, what do you mean? But I think it's more about, is it about culture? So when people don't like immigration, I often think people don't like it's change and it's a different culture and haven't got their head around it, so they're threatened by it. Yeah. And sometimes when I hear people speak pejoratively about gay people, and I hear some people in the media in London who will express pejorative views, it's not about sodomy, it's about, they use words like mincing, or it's the sort of the culture that comes with it that people seem to have a problem. Does that make sense?
It does. There's a great line in Mel Brooks's remake of To Be or Not to Be, the great Lubitsch film, originally Jack Benny, and Mel Brooks did a remake with his wife Anne Bancroft, and for once actually he didn't play a Jewish person. It's set in Poland when Warsaw is invaded by the Germans, and they're an acting troupe, and the Nazis invade. And it becomes a fantastic farce towards the end. But there's one bit where Sasha, I think his name is, Anne Bancroft's dresser, doesn't turn up at the theatre. And she says, where's Sasha? Where's Sasha? Where's Sasha? And Mel Brooks goes, where's Sasha? Where's Sasha? And they say, oh, the Nazis took him. And they say, why? He's not Jewish. He said, no, but he's a faggot, and they take away the faggots as well. And Mel Brooks says, this thing stops now. They take the Jews, they take the gypsies, they take the faggots. Don't they realise without Jews, gypsies and faggots, there's no such thing as show business? And being two of those, and possibly there's a part of me that's vaguely gypsy, I'd like to think so, I can understand it. And I think it's not only that, it's also this sense of the mafia, the gay mafia, that we look after our own,
yes.
that we appoint gay people in high positions, just as that's what Jews do. And I remember it's a thing in Uganda I noticed was still being said all those years after Idi Amin expelled so many Asians from Uganda,
yes.
because they had British passports, and they were one of the big wave of Asians to come to Britain in the 70s. But there's still quite a lot left there, and with that particular quality that Asians have that they share with Jews, which is what made Goodness Gracious Me such an interesting program to me, because it was so like Jewish humour, all the stuff about the mother and it's just very, very similar, and that the hard-working family thing, and in Uganda they still say, the Asians only give jobs to their own. They only look after their own. They do not give jobs equally. It is very unfair, and that was always the thing about Jews. Jews, they always give their son-in-law, their brother-in-law, their children the job and people say that about the Asian with his corner shop in his small business, or which may become a large business. It may become a huge, best-selling relish jar company or something. And it's that sense of they look after their own. They somehow cheat by valuing education, and they go into businesses and they work hard, and it's not fair. I'm not saying it means that the natural English are just so lazy that they expect and entitled that they get slightly irritated. But I know my grandfather's generation of Jewish immigrants, they did work extraordinarily hard, and it was all story, the geschäft, the business. It was all about it. Any extra money went into the business, and the word "the business" is such a Jewish sort of one, and it was all about. I'm doing this so my son will be able to go to university, and his son will go to even better university, and his son might even get Rufus Isaacs. I mean, he's a name many of your listeners won't have heard of, but he was born in Spitalfields, classic Jewish area then, and now a Bengali, Bangladesh area. It's fascinating to see Huguenot chapels, when they were the immigrant wave, turned into synagogues and are now mosques. His father was a stallholder, and he became Marquis of Reading and Viceroy of India. Yeah. So you literally had to call him Your Highness, because he stood in for Viceroy, for the king, when he was in India. It's an incredible journey, and that's...
They're quite moving, those stories, aren't they?
They are.
But that's, to me, that's the immigrant story. That you often, if you've taken the risk of leaving your home to come to another country, you're going to work hard, right? Absolutely. You've made that decision. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think immigrants are slightly trapped between, if you come here and don't work very hard and take benefits, people say, go home, you take on the benefits. If you come here and work really hard, they say, right. you're working, you're better than us at these jobs, and you're taking our jobs, can you go home?
No, it is very hard. But I mean, it's the fact is, you discover when you do one of those programs like Who Do You Think You Are, it's so obvious, it's almost not worth saying, and yet it is one of those blindly obvious things that is worth saying. Is that it's exponential growth, is that we have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, 32 great-great-great-grandparents, 64 great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, 128 great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, 256, 512, 1,024, 2,048, until that's just going back to a few more greats. Now, as Ian Forster pointed out in an essay called On Jew Consciousness in the early 30s, as the rise of anti-Semitism was beginning in Britain with Mosley and various others, he said, I don't think the Prince of Wales, the famous Prince of Wales of the time, who became obviously Edward VIII, he said, I don't think he could probably name his 8 great-great-grandparents. And he comes from the most famous family in the world. Can you name your 8 great-great-grandparents? without any one of them, you wouldn't live. And when you go back, when it goes back to 1024, 2048, etc., each one of those 2048 people who are your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents is responsible for your existence, as responsible for the one called Bacon or Fry. They're not one isn't more important or more related to you. They're all exactly the same quantity of genes. And how are you to know that one of them isn't black, one of them isn't Jewish, one of them isn't anything? You absolutely aren't.
Of course.
And the idea that...
we'll go far enough back.
We
Exactly,
we're all related to each other. That's the point. Yes. And that's so important. And that was one of the many vast and appalling lies of this idea of racial purity. And you still hear it from the sort of BNPs and EDLs, this idea that there is such a thing as Englishness. If there is such a thing as Englishness, I always say my perfect example of two great Britons in their own way are Winston Churchill and Agatha Christie. And they were both half British.
Yeah. Yes, he's half American, isn't he?
Yes, his mother was Jenny Jerome. She was entirely American. Yeah. And so, who knows what her family was? The rest, and Agatha Christie's also half American.
Do you worry that because with I think with gay rights in Britain, the journey seems to have been a positive one, doesn't it, in recent times? Do you worry with immigration at the moment? Do you think attitudes are hardening against immigration?
I do. I think it's unquestionably a vote winner. I'm sad to say. I think there are. And it happens in times of financial hardship and high unemployment and things like that, is that people turn to someone to blame or turn to a scapegoat, or they regard it as a problem that there are just simply too many people. And it so happens we are in the middle of a birth boom at the moment, which is rather surprising. Everyone thought the population was declining, as it is through most of Europe, but the recent figures have shown that our numbers are going up. And I think people of my age are realising, blimey, what about my pension, and what about my this? What's the world going to look like? And where's my old people's home? It's only 20 years away, and is there going to be enough money for any of that?
There seems to have been, I think, almost counterintuitively, you had collapse of Lehman Brothers 5 years ago and this credit crunch, and people were angry at the banks and they got bailed out, and there seemed to be this lack of confidence in a type of capitalism, and I think people thought, well, that will result in a swing to the left, and it doesn't seem to have happened, does it? It seems to have... The country's moved to the right a bit.
It has a bit, yeah. Though I think on certain social issues we're more relaxed. But economically, there hasn't been as much objection to the austerity measures as you might think there were. But I'm no economist, but, the Great Depression was solved, as it were, by the New Deal in the 30s by FDR. And the application of Keynesian economics, which is, Keynes' famous remark was that it is, in an economy, it's worth paying 10 men to go and dig a hole in the ground and then paying another 10 men to fill it in, because you're putting money into the economy which gets spent and moved around, which is the exact opposite of Thatcherite Friedmanism, which says you take money out of the economy.
And you hope that you shrink the public sector and the private sector goes.
Exactly.
I suppose George Osborne would say at the moment, well, he would say, in fact, is saying, isn't he?
Although he's doing what I suppose is a social democrat thing, really, which is, I think, this Tory government could be regarded as pretty much a social democrat one compared to any other right-wing government around the world, is that it's a mixed economy. He's pushing for this. I don't want to say the one that's the superbug in hospitals. HS2.
Yes, HS2. Yes.
HS2. One of them's the superbug. That's MSM. Or one of them's the type of flu.
MRSA, the superbug.
There's a type of flu that's called an HS something. Isn't
yes, there is. Yes, there is. Yes,
it's
I've forgotten as well.
Yeah, but HS2 is definitely the high-speed link too. I think. So you could regard that as a public work. Though obviously anyone who's listening in Buckinghamshire or something is just getting. No, you do just for us. You shut up, Stephen. I used to live in Cheshire, and I'm sure I would have hated it.
Did you? You've got this documentaries about homophobia and gay rights. You've recently called, I think, for the Winter Olympics in Russia to be moved out of Russia because they brought in these rather draconian...
Thank you for noticing that. A lot of people thought that I'd called for them to be boycotted, but I hadn't actually.
No, it's to be moved.
I just would be, yeah.
But you met the Prime Minister about
Yes.
this issue in a pub in the East End owned by Sir Ian McKellen? Is that
It sounds rather bizarre. But the facilitator was a friend of mine who is also, has contacts with the Prime Minister because he's a newspaper proprietor. He's called Yevgeny Lebedev, and he owns the Independent and the Mirror. And
the Standard, doesn't he?
Sorry, Standard.
Standard,
Mirror.
yes, yeah.
Completely mad. He... maybe he's thinking of buying the Mirror as well.
Yes,
And
he'll
so
need really, I hope he'll need really deep pockets if he's going to start.
I think so.
buying the Daily Mirror.
Well, there used to be an old joke, isn't it? Do you know how to make a small fortune in publishing? Start with a large one.
Yes.
He factored this meeting, so we just popped in and had a bit of.
Why there? How did you
supper.
get the Prime Minister to an East End pub?
I think it just seemed like a nice fun place. He'd not been there, and I think he'd wanted to visit it. It is a very famous pub, with
Yes.
the Grapes in Wapping area. Very, very old, one of the oldest pubs still standing. It's absolutely gorgeous. It sort of creaks feels like being on board a ship, and the food is very, very good.
Where is it? Sorry, whereabouts
Wapping,
is it?
kind of area, yeah.
That's because quite a stir when he walks in with this presumably security detail. And
Yes, it's
drives to the back of the pub.
Yes, I think a few. It was obviously not going to be kept a secret. But I think the fact that he said, let's meet there, not at number 10. Or,
Yeah.
I didn't have to sneak round the back of Horse Guards Parade through the garden of number 10 or anything like that, was that we agreed that it would be a private dinner. He made it plain, which I knew anyway, that he has no power over the IOC. He can't tell British athletes not to go to an event, but that what he can do is continue to raise the subject of gay rights inside LGBT rights inside Russia as much as he can. Because it is genuine, and what everyone thinks of David Cameron, it's quite clear that he really, really wanted to push through this same-sex marriage bill,
Yes.
and in the teeth of vehement opposition from his party.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw some documentaries where they out in the country, they were saying this will be the death of the Conservative Party. We'll absolutely destroy it. They will lose the next election if this goes through. Absolute piffle. I mean, it's
Yes, they said
extraordinary.
they lose all their volunteers. I think,
Yes,
didn't
that's
they?
right.
Is that it?
Has that happened? I don't think so. They just move on. I mean, just grow up. Just simply grow up. That's what you want to say to them. Get something worth worrying about to worry about. Because there's all this torture, disease, abuse, misery going on in the world, poverty and horror, and you're worrying about two people falling in love and what gender they are. It's
And
just
so you, cause
crazy.
what's interesting about that for me is in your show, so that we talked about this Ugandan pastor. Now he is not a rational man and a very angry man, and he's at the absolute. There's a spectrum of homophobia. He's at the absolute extreme end, and he's one of those people that you have quite a fierce argument with him. You go on a radio breakfast show with him, and you laugh at his absurdities, and then you get into a more fierce debate off air with him, don't you?
And some of the people who work for the radio programme are kind of holding their head.
Yeah, they are.
Because they find him so ridiculous.
You can never change the mind of a man like that, can you?
It would be funny. I mean, it is funny. And then it suddenly stops being funny when you realise how many heads are being cracked on pavements. And there was an appalling day when a Ugandan newspaper published the faces of over 100 gay Ugandans, basically calling for them to be killed. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary, and I interviewed some of them. I interviewed a transgender, wonderful fellow called Stoch, and he lives a very difficult life, having to go from place to place. One of the most terrifying life stories imaginable. There is this thing that exists from Russia throughout the world, which is particularly difficult for gay women, which is, if they come out early, especially, is called, and I put inverted commas around it, corrective rape. Yeah. In other words, their families often will encourage a friend's son to rape their own daughter to somehow cure her of her lesbianism. And this girl, when she was about 12, was raped by the son of a family friend. She said, I just remember this terrible pain and blood, and it lasted only 20 seconds. In that 20 seconds, she became pregnant and she became HIV positive. In that 20 seconds of just unimaginable wickedness. And she has this cheerful fighting spirit, which is really touching to witness. But you think, how can such awfulness be? They think we're evil, monstrous. They're doing it in the name of Christianity and what the Lord wants. It's
yes, you can't imagine Jesus thinking that.
I just
agreeing with
no.
it. Do you think? But my point was going to be that you take the pastor,
Yes.
dead-eyed crazy man. But there are people in Britain, and there are people on the front bench who are quite rational, intelligent people who voted against
Yes.
same-sex marriage. Have you argued with those people?
I think the one I did. There was a party that the Deputy Prime Minister gave, in which he invited people who were for the same-sex and some, as it were, wavering, and they said, well, why should religious people be forced to marry? Why should a priest be forced to marry a gay couple? And I said, you see, you haven't even understood what the bill is. It's still true that no priest, either of the Church of England or of any other sect of Christianity, is forced to marry somebody who's been divorced in their church. But if a priest wishes to, or a parson, or whatever word, a prelate, whatever, then they can. So divorced people can get married in church, but the priest in charge of that church has a right to say, I'm afraid my doctrine is such that I do not marry people who have been previously married and have divorced. And that will be the same in this same-sex thing. And I was saying, what you don't realise is that the status quo is denying religious freedom for, I can name at least 3 very important, highly respectable, and I think deeply admirable religious groups: the Unitarian Church, the Quaker movement, and the liberal reform wing of of Judaism, all of whom actively seek to wed gay people in their communion so that they can welcome them into them, and are not allowed to by the current law. So you're inhibiting the religious freedom of of others. But this law does not inhibit your freedom at all. You do not have to marry anybody if you don't want to. And people have this idea that gay people are going to be lining up churches, banging on the door saying, you have to marry us, it says so in the law. It doesn't say that. Any more than, as I say, with divorced people. And I think that was the crucial argument in the end, which enough people got into the Tory party and others who were wavering. They realised that it was actually a freeing up, in a sense, of the system.
Never not a good guest. Stephen Fry talking to me about his 2-part documentary,